Hey, good morning. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It's a Wednesday, February 2nd. And on Wednesdays, we like to ask people how their faith, wherever that faith comes from, whomever they have, whatever they have faith in, from, for, how does that drive you to the common good? And I'm so excited that Dode Levenson is on with us today. You're going to love him by the time we're done with this. If you're not already a Dode fan, you're going to be doting on this guy by the time we're done with all of this. So, hey, Dode Levenson, thanks for being with us today, buddy.
Good morning, Doug. Good morning, Dan. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Dode. Dode, we always remind people where we're coming from on this. Producer Dan is outside of some address in South Bend, Indiana. I am snuck in my basement just outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And you are where, Dode?
I'm in Los Angeles, California.
Los Angeles, California. What part of Los Angeles? Like, Los Angeles is one of those neighborhood area driven cities, right?
I'm in the valley near Encino, California.
In the valley. Yeah, that's awesome. When I was a kid, we talked about those girls from the valley. You know, they were mythic in my mind. Those California girls in the valley.
We still talk about them.
Yeah. Still a thing, but they're like your neighbors. Like, they're like just the kids that live down the block. They're not just all. All right. So, Dode, you are many things in this world. A very good friend of O Common Good, an encourager, a consultant, a messaging expert with us. You also have your own history of writing screenplays for movies, screenwriter, TV shows. I think you're a comedian. Do you bill yourself as a comedian? Is that fair?
I'm not a comedian. I'm definitely not. I write comedy. I write a lot of different things, but a comedian implies that's not. I've never done stand up or anything like that. Never been a performer.
So someone who writes comedy doesn't get to be categorized as a comedian in the profession.
No. I don't think so. Comedian's an actual vocation where you go on stage and entertain people with patter and jokes, none of which I have.
Oh, well, you're hilarious nonetheless. And you write funny things for other people. So what I'm interested in, Dode, is how has your life brought you to the place where you spend so much time and energy considering the common good? You're considering it in politics, in civic life, sort of in general life. So, love to get to know you on that. And if people are like, boy, Dode Levenson, I feel like I know that name, it's probably because you're a big fan of the Children of the Corn epics.
No.
And especially Children of the Corn 3.
Oh my God. That's more blame than credit really at this point. No, my background is in journalism. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and also Overland Park, Kansas. Both places. And my last real journalism job, I worked in Jerusalem for the Jerusalem Post eons ago. And then I pivoted out to Los Angeles to write movies and television, which I've been fortunate enough to do. Written across genres, family comedy, animation, science fiction comedy. Worked with Howard Stern. Worked with Magic Johnson on a feature family film. Basketball movie. And then I did the Stephen King film because I had a shot at doing it. Thought it'd be fun to try something different. And now, thanks to you, in large part, I'm writing political messaging and framing, studying under the George Lakoff School, who is a brilliant linguist from recently retired from Berkeley. But my personal background is I am the son of a rabbi, Rabbi Paul Levenson. His last pulpit was Martha's Vineyard. He was politically active, so that was very much a part of my youth growing up. And he marched with Martin Luther King. He's always been politically active and believes in righteousness and justice and equality. And so that was always a part of my identity, but growing up. But in terms of this, my recent foray into more active political messaging and framing Around the time that Donald Trump got elected, those of us with that still had hair were pulling as much of it out. We were so frustrated and traumatized by Donald Trump's election. And
Mm-hmm.
a dear friend, Richard Foos, who is a politically active and owns Rhino Records, or formerly owned Rhino Records, but the founder of it, rang me up and said, "Hey, would you like to go to this fundraising event?" And I always say yes, because with Richard, it's always a good time.
That's
And
right.
it's music and there's politics. And those are my two probably driving forces. And I showed up there and I thought I was being punked because there was only a handful of people there. Moby was there, Congressman Ted Lieu, and then in comes this tall drink of water from Minnesota in a cool hat, Doug Pagitt, yourself. And I'm looking around, I'm like, why am I listening to an evangelical Christian tell me about, like, I thought we were going to some political, event. And then the more I listened to you, Doug, the more I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is a guy who's actually doing something rather than just wringing hands and fretting about the terrible state we have in our country now with Donald Trump in the head position. And I loved what you were saying. You said that there's a possibility that if we get evangelical Christians to vote Christian values and not just reflexively vote, for the right, for the GOP, we would have enough to tip the election towards the Democrats and that had a great deal of appeal to me. Actually, I'm sorry, this was this was ahead of, this was a few years ago. So
Yeah, it was just before
that's,
the 2018 midterms. Is that right?
I believe so.
think
Yeah.
I think that was right. Yeah, I can't remember. You've become such a fixture in the vote common good world. It's hard to remember when there was no Dode in this world. Hey, I want to tap back into some of that childhood, upbringing. And your dad's a rabbi, but your dad was a particular kind of rabbi. Obviously, as you said, like he was socially engaged in the early and mid '60s, but he was also a singing rabbi, like
He
an
was a,
entertainer rabbi. And I love anytime
yes.
people take their religious positions and mix it with another, I don't know, approach. So
Mhm.
can you talk a bit about that? What's it like growing up? I mean, you grew up like in Wisconsin and then
Kansas
Kansas and
City,
then, yeah, in Kansas
Kansas
City.
City,
And
and then Boston. My folks are from the East Coast, so I have East Coast roots that go back, um, a generation. But my parents looked around and said, "Where would we like to raise our family of four?" And Santa Cruz was an option, which I found out later, but there was too much wildness there, and wish I could have talked some sense into him and said, "Why not
yes.
Santa Cruz?" But ended up Kansas City was a really nice place to raise four children,
Hmm.
and my dad always liked to play and write original songs, play the guitar and sing, and it was as a way of getting the young people engaged in things that they might not otherwise respond to. And he loved the crowd, and he loved the sing-alongs, and he loved teaching through music. And it was quite a legacy. And I think it was pre Schoolhouse Rock, but in our house we had the folk music scene was alive and well, so we had those
Hmm.
political activist roots. um,
Hmm.
Theodore Bickel, Bob Dylan, Odetta, and all of that was very much the audio soundtrack of my childhood.
So I find that intriguing, right? I mean, it's, okay, granted, the 1960s and 70s was an experimental time in a lot of our civic institutions, right? There was a thing afoot, clearly a thing afoot, but not everybody went down that route, and not all religion, especially, chose to blend. Sort of as you describe it, kind of entertainment and fun and music and culture with faith and a demand for civic engagement. And man, that seems like that was a robust concoction.
Agreed. I mean, I don't know anything else. I mean, that was my childhood. So my father remains a bit of an eccentric. He's now retired in Rockville, Maryland, and he had a motorcycle with a sidecar. I mean, he's a bit of a character. I don't know if you remember the movie "Oh God" with George Burns, but he's kind of like that. But imagine that as a singing rabbi, and you get a little taste of my father, I think.
Yeah. So a lot of people have thought about the entertainment world, and they think about Hollywood, especially religious people, and not only from the Christian tradition, but from a lot of backgrounds, and feel like, hey, Hollywood and entertainment and television movie production, that's a force of on one side of our culture, and then good values and faith and family and all that's on the other side. I've never really held that. I grew up in a kind of a TV family with no religion. So when I got into religion, I'm like, I don't know, all that Hollywood stuff always felt good to me. Like that's all I knew, from Billy Jack to Bruce Springsteen. I was like, I'm in on this thing. But so many other people that I met inside the faith tradition and still kind of think about that arena, that part of our society and culture as the more negative influences. Can you talk a bit about that? This is your life. This is where you live. I've met some
Yeah,
of the
no,
greatest people in the world that work and live in that space. Like it's amazing the kind of good-hearted, caring about one another in this country people that I've met from out there.
yeah, I never had negative associations with. Am I still there? Oh, there we go. I've never had negative associations with the entertainment industry, just because in the course of life you meet good people and not so good people everywhere you look. And I don't know if it's me or where I was raised or how I was raised, but I believe in like, let's meet people where they are and find out if they're good or bad. And I just feel like nobody wants to cast themselves as villains in their own movie. And those cliches about, the Hollywood cliches are everywhere you want to look, they exist. So I just kind of was lucky enough to gravitate towards an incredibly
Hmm.
talented and I think morally balanced group of friends who were ambitious and put out good bodies of work, including now Joey Soloway, who the creator of Transparent was early friend. I just got lucky. I met some very, very good people um, and fell in with them.
Hmm.
And in the comedy circle, in movies and television. And so I never had bad associations. And ultimately, it's proving to be the biggest asset because it comes down to, I mean, the Bible stories, um, are pretty compelling. That's kind of the
Hmm.
early storytelling. And those things resonate and they guide us. And I love rhetoric. And
Huh.
probably what, as much as anything, what brought me into vote the common good. And the common good is the idea of the Commonwealth. And if you know your history and your civics, we all came together, declared our independence from England, and the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights. These were taught and were very important as a child, and still continue to be important because I'm Jewish and I identify as such and know the history that if they had a Bill of Rights and Declaration of Independence in the old country where my family came from and suffered through pogroms and the Holocaust, maybe they wouldn't have had to deal with those
Hmm.
terrible circumstances. So I love this country. Very patriotic. My mother, rest in peace, was devoted herself to immigrants. She was
Hmm.
the president of MATSAL, Massachusetts Association of Teachers of English as a Second Language. My parents were both active in Soviet Jewry, bringing in Soviet immigrants and teaching them English so that they get settled and have a better life in America. And finally, my mother was first generation, so she, was born in America, and her parents were born in Eastern Europe and suffered under oppressive regimes, and she was the translator. And so that she found that to be such a powerful role. She wanted to do that for other families who went through similar trials and tribulations.
Have you always been interested in the electoral political side of things? Do you see yourself as a political member, of one side or the other? Have you moved around? What's been your own interest in who we elect and how they identify themselves in their own politics?
Excellent question, Doug. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I always give myself a little sparkle when I have an excellent question. So.
I mean, good sparkle sound. I was, I grew up in the Watergate era. So my heroes were the journalists, Woodward and Bernstein, and who brought a president to heel in the name of our values and our system of government, that nobody is above the law, that we are a nation of laws, and that the journalists in terms of the, quote, fourth branch of government were there to help keep the other three honest. At least that was then. So I grew up very idealistic, and that's how I kind of identified. In terms of my politics, they were always left of center. Obviously, if my dad's marching with Martin Luther King, and actually suffering because of it, he actually, where I was born in New Jersey, New Brunswick, New Jersey, he was summarily dismissed because there was, quote unquote, white flight coming from the cities to the suburbs. My dad gets a job in a suburban temple, and he's, very pro civil rights, and that did not resonate with the people who were doing it there. So he took controversial positions. He, his motto was always the same as my favorite journalism professor, the late great Howard Ziff, which was comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And, the last time I remember my dad giving a fiery speech prior to his retirement was on Martha's Vineyard, where he was really reading the riot act in a way that made me a little uncomfortable, to the likes of Alan Dershowitz and recently, or just announced, Supreme Court Justice, I think Breyer. I think that he was a guest there. He's not Jewish, but he was at the service in Martha's Vineyard for whatever reason. So
and
progressive.
And we've talked a lot about this, and I'd love for you to say more about it. The frustration that a lot of us feel with our politics, sometimes it's on how our politicians behave in policy. And others of us additionally have frustration with how our politics are handled rhetorically, like how we position them and talk about them and message them and the story that we're telling. And I know that a lot of us are realizing that growing up in whatever story we were told of the United States, whatever that is, whatever functional fiction we were told about what this country is and what we're up to and how we move in it and how different people and groups can access or not access it. A lot of people have realized that wasn't totally accurate. There were some untrue fictions in there, not some helpful and true fictions that we've become enamored with. So granted, yes, the story we tell ourselves is never all encompassing. Sometimes is intentionally meant to deceive even our own selves in what we're up to. But there's a real frustration a lot of us have with like the story we're telling about what we're up to in this country and how we tell it. And some of that's incumbent upon our politicians. That's one of the places where you've wanted to engage. And, when you list yourself as a messaging maven, you're trying to help think about how we narrate a different story of what America is. Fair enough? Is that a fair enough
I would
description of?
100% agree. I think it's the most important aspect. It's actually Ian Masters who does um, his podcast. Ian Masters, he talks about post-truth America,
Mm-hmm.
which is a kind of chilling tagline, but it seems to be accurate that it's almost like the stories are more important than what's actually happening. And we're in unprecedented times that way. And it occurred to me when I became more politically active after meeting you and being inspired by you and wanting to get involved and work with Vote the Common Good. Because, again, from my childhood, my father always had colleagues from different faiths and taught at Rocker's College with, we had priests and
Hmm.
pastors as frequent house guests. So I was familiar with people who had faiths but different practices than I was raised with. But
Hmm.
storytelling was so important. In fact, before I forget, Dr. Jonathan Metzl of Carnegie Mellon, who just wrote a book called, or not just, but Dying of Whiteness,
Mm-hmm.
chronicles some of the stories about the real, what's actually happening versus the myth of what people are saying is happening in America. And his focus on this book is about gun violence, the reality of it in the Midwest and other places where the stories that don't get the amplification that they probably should are chronicled and examined and looked at. And he's a childhood friend of mine and just brilliant and would probably make a good guest on this podcast.
Well,
So
hey, let's shoot him a text when we're done here and tell him you just had a great time on the podcast. And Professor Metzger would be a treasured guest. Metzel would be a treasured guest here. So please let's make that invitation. Look, not to be anybody inside of a system has a different view on the effectiveness of that system than people that are outside of it. So those of us who see ourselves with access to the democratic political apparatus sometimes form our own frustrations with the democratic political apparatus and really want it to be different. You're like giving waking hours to this. Can you say a little bit more about why that matters? Like, what's the deep
wow.
motivation of some of that?
Yeah, I would love to speak to it because I think it's the most important um, aspect. And people, can criticize, well, it's not more important than policy, but I would suggest that it might be on par or more important because, the victors write the history books, but we're writing it in real time and it
Hmm.
is helping shape the narrative. So, um, the messaging that you were asking me about, I mean, all comes down to storytelling. It all comes down to messaging and framing. And nobody, like I said, nobody sees themselves as villains in their own movie. So my good friends across the aisle on the Republican side, who, by the way, some of my dearest friends and are Republicans still, as long as we're having an earnest conversation and not just talking ideological or it doesn't, descend into ad hominem attacks, which I have to be careful of myself.
Sure.
Because I'm a human being and, it's very frustrating, but you have to understand that if you're coming from a place of, trying to get to truth and shared values, but you just see things a little bit differently, then how you frame a story actually makes quite a bit of difference. And I believe that the Democratic legislation and that agenda is one of compassion for working class people. And it's very hard for me to sit back and watch um, the working class people, in my opinion, get exploited by the messaging and framing on the right, where we're vulnerable, but ultimately it's a lot of smokescreen for some policy that is going to have adverse effects on the very um, working class voters that need either a compassionate ear in Washington or tax credits for their children, or maybe to keep a closer watch on corporate overreach and regulations that are actually benefiting people. I mean, there's it,
Hmm.
top to bottom. I think it's the most important part of the political arena is messaging and framing whatever political position you happen to be adopting, so that it's seen in the best possible light. And that goes not just externally to the general public, and this is where I hope I'm going to be able to make a really big difference, which is internal messaging, meaning that twofold messaging, to the general public on the one hand, and then dovetailing so that we kind of come together against a common enemy. In this case, a neo-fascist movement that seems to, well, as of yesterday or day before yesterday, has openly confessed to not caring about laws or openly admitting violation of oaths against Constitution, which was he just admitted just like 48 hours ago.
Yeah,
Just
you're talking about former failed presidential candidate Donald Trump. That's who you're talking about.
correct. And I suppose just to touch up on that a little bit is that the oath of office. Like, I'm always curious. Like, I take all of that stuff. Like I said, the rhetoric is very important to me. All the words that in the Declaration of Independence and what Thomas Jefferson said and Bill of Rights, all of that just seems to be such really good ideas that when I hear a politician violating his oath of office, it bothers me at a great level, because no one's forcing anybody to take the oath of office. They're swearing on a Bible. They're pledging before God and their peers and family to keep that oath. And I mean, we all have the term puffery for advertising. Like, there's an understandable where you can exaggerate perhaps or whatever, but I think that the oath of office that is taken is a serious one,
Hmm.
and it bothers me at my soul that when it's violated so blatantly and so dismissively, it's like, well, what's our foundation? Where's our American values or traditional
Hmm.
values? How are they being expressed, and why does the right keep voting for um, politicians who thumb their noses at their oath of office and don't seem to be taking their commitment to the common good as seriously as I think they should, and as I wish they would.
So well said. We've talked about this a lot, and I'd love for you to share it with others. Your thoughts on this. It seems to me that the political right and cultural right, maybe conservatives overall, Republicans even, tend to organize their messaging around identity and how people feel. The political left, the progressives, often Democrats, tend to organize around policy, not identity, but policy, and are very fixated on the words that are used as opposed to the
Mhm.
feelings that it engenders. And then the two sides, I think this is generally accurate, then critique the others the other side based on that same standard. So then Republicans, conservatives, the right side tends to talk about identity politics over on the left, and the people on the left tend to talk about the destructive policies. It's my theory that for human beings, maybe at large, but certainly in the 21st century in the United States, identity and how it makes you feel is a better organizing principle than policies and specific word concerns. Uh, Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good observation, and one that I wish that the communications wing, the DCCC of the Democratic Party, would take to heart, because they love to engage in policy talk, which is very wonky. But I think I started to fall asleep when you said the word policy, and I don't think I'm alone in that. Um, and I mean, make an entertaining story, sure, but make one that illustrates. It's great if everybody is on your wavelength and talking policy, then you talk policy. But one thing I learned as both a journalist and a screenwriter is if you want to talk to a specific audience, then you use language, vernacular, framing references that are well understood by your target audience. And the right and the Republicans seem to be masters of it, and we seem to be more mired in the policy talk. But it's like if if a tree falls in the woods but nobody publicizes it properly, did it really fall?
If
I
nobody
think
gets in
that's
there and
right.
cuts it down to makes a table out of it, it's really just a waste of time. Why let this stuff fall? When I think about how Joe Biden as a candidate, and then the messaging around the Biden administration, of which I'm a big fan of him and did everything I could to try to support his reelection by people that would care at all what I thought about things. He has this phrase where I think what he's trying to do is to engage identity. And he often will say this phrase, "That's not who we are." Right? He'll talk about it's always kind of put in this like challenging, we're better than that. That's not who we are. It's an interesting use of this phrase. I don't think it works very well.
Well, it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all because, again, not that I'm a PhD in rhetoric. However, it is certainly in my field, and you can say that's not who we are as long as that you prove that you're actually not that.
Yes.
The trouble is that in election cycle after election cycle, when President Biden says that's not who we are, and the public kind of like shows up like, yeah, we are. I mean, this is who we are. Then you're like, oh, either it's getting hot in here, or I got to figure out some other messaging. And I'm just thinking, why not to completely criticize all of the Democratic messaging, but that is why I'm throwing my hat into that ring. And I'm working as a political consultant and messaging maven for different campaigns, national, state, different candidates I've been talking to for exactly that reason. Like, what's wrong with coming up with just "Thank you, Joe" as a campaign, a little tag phrase, because of all the things that we have. We've got shots in the arm, we've got masks, we now have COVID tests being offered for free, all this stuff, and yet do we hear in the public? Have I even heard the phrase that should be on everybody? Just "Thank you, Joe." And they had "Make America Great" hats, right? Very simple message. Whatever happened to "Thank you, Joe" for the things that all we really end up hearing is the amplification of our internal squabbles, how far short we fell from our very ambitious goals. We don't mention the willful obstruction of the other side, their participation in throwing sand into the machinery. So we are left with undermining our own messages.
Yeah, it might actually be not as useful, considering the fact that there were 5, 6, 7, 8 years in which the punchline "Thanks, Obama" was landing on people, right? Where that was a thing they tried under the Obama administration, right? And then it turned into, gets blamed for everything, and that kind of "Thanks, Obama." What I'm wondering, it seems to me that the conservative right tends to talk about, if Joe Biden is saying that's not who we are, the identity the identity side of the political right and the how you feel, it bases in nostalgia. It's one of the narratives of conservatism that it talks about who we were. Make America great again is that, right? It's who we were. Seems to me that there could be something about, and this was, I think, Martin Luther King Jr.'s primary message was, who will we be? We're making those decisions now, right? So if the conservatives say it's all about who we were and could we get back to some fictional time when things were good, and Joe Biden says the way we're behaving right now, that's not who we are right now. King was saying something that felt more compelling, which is, who will we be? I can see a day, I have a dream, right? This kind of future focused, progress oriented, sure things are now, but maybe, just maybe. And a lot of the great religious teachers use this kind of future focused language. Some people go too far, they go into the afterlife for their future focused promise. But I don't know. Do you think about that at all? Sort of not being
All
in
the time.
now and not being in the past, but kind of being progressively focused or progress focused or future focused?
Absolutely, all the time. In fact, one of the stories that I tell, or the possibilities I say, first of all, is aspirational, but I like the idea of nostalgia as well. But if that is effective, I like aspirational, putting out what we could be. I also think at this point in time, we've gotten so far away from where we began, which is why another reason why I love the vote the common good, because
Yeah.
that reminds me of commonwealth, which is what we were when we were 13 colonies, 13 commonwealths. And I look at it like this is like I like the idea of reselling democracy to Americans. Like, hey, it's
Yeah.
kind of a neat idea to have the governors, and the governed have a understanding, checks and balances, all of the values that we're supposed to espouse, and that includes, by the way, not ceding territory to the right that we've ceded. Like, I don't believe I'm from the government and I'm here to help should be allowed to go into a history as a punchline. In fact, one of the examples I trot out is um, a commercial campaign I was pitching had that at the beginning where Ronald Reagan says that famous speech,
Yeah.
and I want to juxtapose that with the poor citizens of Texas who were flooded and frozen at the same
Yeah.
time Ted Cruz was going to Mexico, and they were people who, just like you and me, in their homes, just trying to live their life, get through the pandemic or whatever was going on, and pipes were bursting. Their bills, their power bills, their utility bills were going through the roof. And when they just want potable water and safety and just have the basic, Maslow's hierarchy of needs met, and it's not being met, and they're at their ends, and they're crying and they're exasperated, and then you get a knock at the door saying, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And the next thing you know, they're in blankets, they're being fed, they have space
Yeah.
heaters, and suddenly that's not a punchline, that's a welcome thing.
Yeah.
So, I want to reclaim the patriotism that I believe that the Democrats ought to own, because I believe that the right and the Republicans have squandered the claim to it. And I think they've left a void there if we can
Hmm.
step into it.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Hey, you also are part of my favorite synagogue in the country, Ikar. You want to talk a little bit about that? You're Ikar. Your rabbi and I used to pal around back when we were both starting young communities, and there's this like interfaith connection between Jews, Christians, Muslims, and others that were all sort of in the same space some 20 years ago. Can you talk about that, like how
Love to.
your own life and faith have connected you in that beautiful community?
I would love to. Rabbi Sharon Brous, is such an inspirational rock star rabbi, a religious and spiritual leader. When I first saw her, she had just moved to LA. I don't know if she had established or was just establishing a car. I went to a salon in Los Angeles at somebody's house, and it was crowded, and people were having, cakes and cookies. We're there for an inspirational speaker, and I kind of looked up from the cookie table, which is a big deal for me because that's very compelling in of itself.
Yeah, right. Well
When
done.
when I heard this rhetoric coming from Rabbi Brous, and I was like, is she reading? Is she just speaking extemporaneously? And I'm like, who are you? And when I found out she was just speaking, she can fill a stadium. She has that kind of presence and
Yeah.
the kind of righteous rhetoric that comes freely, a way of discussing nuance, of what we're all going through, what we're feeling, either the isolation, that sense of tribalism that you bring up, and how we deal with the other, and becoming the bridge, initiating dialogue with people of other faiths, other communities, in order to turn down the temperature, to stop the polarization, or to leave a little pressure off the gasket, so that there's room for discussion. Because in the absence, if we're demonizing the other to that degree, the conflict doesn't go away. It
Yeah.
just means we don't have discussions or ways of seeing each other as human beings. And then the next way that those conflicts are resolved is through violence. And I've seen that story play out before, and I certainly don't want to see it on our own shores. And so Sharon Brous was and remains an example of how it should be done, I believe, in this country, in terms of her magnanimity, her message, her approach to other faiths and other organizations. I just think she's absolutely the best, and has been a transformative voice in our community here in Los Angeles, and in my life personally, having conducted, co-officiated with my father at my last marriage.
Yeah.
So,
which is a cliffhanger in its own right. So the part of the reason I like asking people about their biographies, and I'll tell you this, when you ask somebody about their biography, whether that's most recent biography, like this community you're involved in now, or how you grew up, we all tend to do that. You start naming names, right? Like history is a first name basis enterprise, right? There are people who did things and you did things, and there are, history is a people effort. Sometimes we're told history is a series of social and political and civic pressures. And the big question in a lot of history is it moments that create great people, or do great people create moments that change history? Like, this is truly something people discuss and argue about. And we'll have some historians on from different perspectives in the future here to talk about this, because I think it's really crucial to this moment. Because we currently live in an age where a lot of progressives believe that what we need is to change the systems and structures. And I agree. Systems and structures have to change. Our laws, our policies, the way we operate, the stories we tell, that all has to change. The question is, what changes those systems and structures? Does systemic change them, or do people change them? I have bounced around over time on sort of both sides of this equation. I'm currently much more comfortable on the side of, great people make moments. And that's sort of course, it's a little bit of both, but we need people to rise up. We need a true people movement. I think that's the notion of this country, was a we the people effort. And it just takes people to do the right things. Like, all of our laws were created because people wrote them. All of our policies and structures are in place because people keep them in place. You can't really change policies, but you can change people, is my theory of things. Do you have thoughts around that? How do you get after that notion?
100%. 100%. It is people, not policy, or policy evolves from people and leadership in particular. And that is a moving target, in that people can evolve, positions can evolve. For example, you can't just be continuously criticized because at one point you held this opinion. If you're an open person, and there's a case to be made that's compelling, that maybe your earlier position wasn't thought all the way through, or circumstances have changed. For example, I was right there at the very beginning with all the woke stuff, wanting to get the language correct, and was kind of, even maybe internally crowing. I'm not totally proud of it when somebody who was called out was given a comeuppance. But when I see how that's evolved, where it's all about the comeuppance and the gotcha, and your life is over because you did, a bad joke or whatever it is, or used the wrong language, then I'm like, well, wait a minute, let me reevaluate both my earlier position and how
Mhm.
this is all going down, and go, maybe is the goal to humiliate? Is the goal to ruin people's lives? Like, how does that help illuminate our cause or bring people together? So I think now that if you're going to have the woke culture, which people seem to be afraid of taking on for being labeled as not a friend to the cause, I'm like, look, if I know well-meaning people who misspeak and who maybe haven't been around an environment that or don't have the education, and I'm not a fan of finger wagging, um, unless there's an exit ramp. If there's a way that you can take that bad situation and let people, get something positive out of it. I don't want to ruin anybody's life. I want people to be evolved, or
Yeah.
people to be sensitive or understand another person's position that may be different than their own, or the other person's experience. And I'm not sure that's achieved by by ruining people's lives. So, like, my
Hmm.
position now, not I guess officially or whatever, is if you're going to show somebody who has violated the invisible hair triggers of the woke um, group, whatever people are calling them now, then all I ask is it cool to have an off ramp to use that as an educational thing
Yeah.
instead of just
Hmm.
condemning them? Like, why wouldn't the leader of this group say, okay, we have identified this person as somebody who maybe didn't use language properly, or who made an ignorant statement. Let's start a dialogue with them and say, do you understand why all this kind of stuff happened to you? Not just to try and humiliate them, or try to, show that we, stick to our dogma, or, you or suffer the consequences. Let's remember, this is about education, about bringing people along, about inclusivity, about, and if it dips into self-righteousness, if it dips into chest thumping, and crowing over the your vanquished opponent whose life is ruined and is unemployable, I'm not sure you've achieved what you said you were going to achieve. And it's up to us on our side to offer this as a point of view, and challenge them to come up with exit ramp strategies that will help elevate the discourse, bring people together, and make everybody understand that this is not about gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. It's about, just being more
Yeah.
sensitive without necessarily ruining their lives.
I like the way you say that, because, in criminal justice work, there's long been pressure to decide, is our criminal justice system designed to punish or to rehabilitate? And
Exactly.
curiously, some people who really want to make sure that our criminal justice system is about rehabilitation don't often want to offer that to other social conditions, right, of rehabilitation. That there's something that just we can't seem to differentiate those that we're afraid of from those that we're mad at, right? And sometimes you have to prevent people you're afraid of from doing harm. But just being mad at people, I'm talking in the criminal justice area, like we so often do, or we think you've violated some cultural norm that you're going to be punished. That's a real question that we have to ask, right? Can we help people do things better? And to acknowledge, I was at a Walgreens this morning because I took off my sock and I looked down at my big toe on my left foot, and I had like an inch long cut, like
Mm.
slice on the top of my toe that had blood on it. And I didn't have it there yesterday morning. And I sleep with my socks on. So this morning I take my socks off and sleeping with my socks on is a whole other issue. But I'm like, I literally have no idea how I got this cut and why there's blood on my toe. No, like freaking me out a little bit. Like, what was I doing that I got a cut on my toe? Where have I been? Nowhere. So I stopped at this Walgreens to pick up make sure I had a Band-Aid big enough for my big toe because of our Band-Aid collection at our house. So all that to say, I happened to just glance down the walkway, the aisle, and I saw a guy wearing wearing a mask. It was black, and he wore a black mask over his face, as people do when they're out in public still. And it struck me that in January of 2020, 2 years ago today, or February 2nd, 2020, if someone was wearing a mask over their mouth in Walgreens, that person would have been perceived as a danger. In February of 2022, a person not wearing a mask in Walgreens is perceived as a danger. We
Correct.
inverted something, right, for a whole lot of reasons that are good, but the actual behavior is interpreted in two radically different ways because conditions have changed. I think about people like you and I when it comes to race. And what I was taught, because of our ages, I mean, I'm 55. I don't know if you're willing to share your age, but I think we're somewhere in the
we're kindred spirits in
ballpark-ish. Right? We've been breathing the formerly polluted and now cleaner air because of government action about the same amount of time. And when I was coming of age, we cared a lot about race. And the way I was told to care about race and to think that it's important and to deal with it is to not make it the standard by which you understand people. So if you're going to describe someone in a space or a place and they're of a different race than you are, you don't lead with that. You lead with other things. And you don't say that the person is Chinese or the person is Puerto Rican or the person is African American. That's not what you start with. Well, that's changed in our adult lives. That has, like the mask of February of 2020 and the mask of February 2022, has inverted. Now, if you ignore that and you go out of your way to not mention that, people are like, are you speaking of the Chinese person? Like, you should just recognize their race and stop ignoring it, because race isn't something you can ignore anymore. And I know a lot of people who've just been that swirl of the shift. It takes a while to catch up on, right? So how do you talk about this? How do you share this? I've been with an adult male that got tears in his eyes when we were talking about this. And he said, I deal with this every day. I just thought I was doing it right. And it turns out I'm doing it wrong. But that way of like ignoring race, Colbert's former, shtick on television was to sort of say, I'm colorblind. I don't see race. I was literally taught you're supposed to be colorblind to race, right? That was not a punchline. That was an actual approach to at least, the Minneapolis, Golden Valley area in the late 70s through the 80s when I was being enculturated as a child and as a young adult. So if the point is if the point is rehabilitation, then we say, oh, no. Now wearing a mask is not a dangerous thing. It's an anti-dangerous thing. Now, recognizing race and waking up to that and recognizing our situation, you speak about it differently. So put your mask on or reference race and learn how to do it and know how to wear the mask properly and learn how to speak. If we had a society that was comfortable enough allowing people to do this, instead it's like, okay, boomer, okay, Xer, okay, so-and-so, you just don't know, get out of the way and go sit in the corner until you learn the new vocabulary for this. That's a thing that exists in our society and culture that I think is rather dangerous. And I feel like in the messaging and political messaging, to acknowledge some of this, not to say, oh, white fragility, it's hard on white people to know how to talk, just to say like, no, I know you were told this, it's now that, and that's how it goes. So get with it, and we're going to help you learn how to catch up. This works on both sides, not punishing, but rehabilitating. And then people being willing to say, oh, we've shifted this. Now we know that this is a better way to behave than the previous way, and helping people in society and culture realize that shouldn't send you into a shame narrative, into a shame spiral. It should send you into a hopeful growth and change narrative. Thoughts on any of that diatribe? I know, but
no. Well, actually, here's two very specific thoughts. One is, if you want to discuss race, good news / bad news is, with this new lawsuit from the Miami Dolphins, that you are going to get lots of opportunities because it's unavoidable. I don't know if you've been following what's been going on, but that lawsuit ensures that there's going to be a dialogue about
Mm.
that, and a lens that's going to, it may end up, polarizing people more, on the one hand. On the other hand, it will compel the need for a civil discussion, meaning that we ought to be able to have a conversation about it without, from a civil point of view. Like you said, if you were raised one way, and the that um, that has evolved. How we address race, how we look at race, has a whole new way of new discussion parameters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And buckle in, because this is not going away. This is going to be something that is going to, people are going to talk about across living rooms, over holidays, football fans, non-football fans. And so I think it's an opportunity, to really dig in on this idea of an exit ramp, where you have good people who are well intentioned,
Yeah.
who are not only do they say I don't have a racist bone in their bodies, and aren't responded to it with a smirk. Like, maybe they don't. Like I said, nobody wants to be a villain in their own movies, and they resent the fact that they've been automatically cast as a racist because they
Yeah.
they didn't language in a way that is, that shows that they're evolved, that they're paying attention. That's also got elements of control
That's
and
right.
controlling other people, and we need to be able to speak how we speak and not be automatically put into woke jail. So I know that makes me a little bit on the outside to even have that position, but I believe that if we are to unite as a country, if we're going to unite around common good, around our values that we all share collectively, then we are going to have to evolve a way of having dialogue with each other, a way of expressing those values that, is a way so that the other can be,
Yeah.
can see us as human beings. When you dismiss me or dismiss somebody else, it
Yeah.
really, you're stopping dialogue. It's not, that's not a good, um, direction for the country. It's not helping us heal or come together, and it's playing into the hands of the politics of division, which really is being stoked by one side more than the other. But we have to do our part and rise up to our own challenges that we set for ourselves. We can't just sit there and wag a finger and
Right.
point out, everything they're doing wrong without explaining, hey, what's the way? Where's our common ground? Where's our
Yeah.
common good? Where does faith, hope, and love come in and play into this dialogue and this moment that we're experiencing
Mm-hmm.
together?
Yeah, Dode, I really do appreciate that so much. And for your wise words saying, "Look, this is coming up. It is coming up." I mean, if you know the governor of Virginia, the new governor there, when writing a critique, school laws that are critiquing the teaching of what they call critical race theory, or a full story of the racial tensions in the United States, invoked Martin Luther King Jr. by saying King wanted us to not judge one another by the color of our skin, by the content of our character. And what you people are doing is continuing to talk about the color of our skin. Or we played in the podcast yesterday, Ted Cruz on his podcast talking about Joe Biden saying, I'm going to nominate a black woman, saying, race is just really about skin pigment coloration, the level of pigment that you have. These are both men of a generation we recognize that I think are operating perhaps not in good faith, but are tapping into a group of people who are like, yeah, that's what I was taught, is the content of your character, not the color of your skin. Why are you now talking about the color of their skin? Because the situation has inverted, and because we now know that what King was getting at there is not how it had been co-opted in the 1980s when King's birthday became a holiday, and a lot of that stuff gets all inverted. So this is the trick, right? And I think we need, to your point about how we respond to each other. Boxing is one metaphor that I'm not a big boxing fan. I'm certainly not a UFC fan. Is that what it's called? The Ultimate Fighting is it UFC or UCF or whatever, but where people get in cages and punch each other and beat each other up. I know another podcaster named Joe really is into that kind of stuff, and he that's his world, and I find it to be despicable. And boxing too, where judo is a really great way to deal with a violent attack that comes to you. Like, some people are taught just to be street fighters. Some people are taught to flee. Some people are taught to freeze, right? But judo is this other alternative, which is you allow the violent act to be the thing that's going to disarm the person bringing the violent act, right? That's the thing you're doing in judo. You're not initiating. You're using the body weight of the person who's using an attacking motion. It seems like that's the kind of thing we need. And humor, well placed and well crafted and developed like, a guitar playing level of skill is what's necessary. And we could be better at this stuff in our rhetoric, right? Instead of learning punchback narratives, we start to learn judo narrative. So when someone says to me, I like, here's one of my little judo tricks. When people say to me, I don't have a racist bone in my body. I'm like, yeah, but you do have a few racist stories in your head. So let's just recognize it's not about bones in your body, and our bones actually aren't what are racist. So I agree. Of course you don't have a racist bone. That's not where it is. But we do have some stories in our head that are really uncomfortable. So I can agree with you. Of course you don't have a racist bone. But what do we do about these stories we have that kind of get us trapped in not understanding ourselves and others? Could we deal with those instead of making it about the physical? Because what people use when they say racist bone in my body is meaning some kind of a metaphor, right? Like, why are you invoking bones right now about the ideas in your head? So I think there's a way to be whimsical, to be fun. Now, not everybody will find that one particularly helpful, but finding alternative ways to respond tit for tat. I believe that this is part of what the Christian tradition should hold, because Jesus was big into this kind of stuff. Don't return insult for insult. Don't hate those who hate you. Don't return evil for evil. Like, find a judo way to get out of that thing so that you're not stuck in that battle and in that story. And what we need to do is bring ourselves to a new place, not with rock'em sock'em robot kind of movement. And that's what happens a lot in our politics, right? Is, well, they do this, so then we should do that. And I just think, boy, I'm not a third way person anymore. I used to think third, but I think that's just a metaphor that's broken. I just think there's another way to respond to those things that allow the weight of that bad idea to carry itself, where you don't have to undo it, and to find, as you say, the place of connection between two people. And I'm being philosophical this morning because I think you bring that out of me, because I put on a special hat today for Dode. I normally wear the fedora style hat, but today I wanted a Dode special hat. I feel like a philosopher. Yeah. That's my like huckster hat, and I put on my philosopher's hat today. Maybe that's what's causing all this rhetorical flurry.
You look sharp. I love that. Yeah, I love the idea of the judo as a metaphor for what we need to do to kind of get through this moment or get through this experience. And I'm also sensitive to the, I want to lean into the UFC fan group, because I don't want to turn away from them as a group. I want to welcome them into the fold and into the discussion. And, a guilty pleasure of mine, might be watching an old Ali Frazier fight, or even a good UFC fight.
Dan cut his mic right now. He just said that he appreciates an old Muhammad Ali and Frazier fight. Cut him. Silence.
But no, I also, part of my, background, and what I think is a really important goal is to reach across the aisle to those alpha males who I think are critical to both have as allies, not have as our antagonists, but have as allies, and recognize that that we have certain instincts, pugilistic instincts, and that we want to channel that energy into something positive. And that's where I like sports. That's why, one of the things I like about football and some of those other, rock'em sock'em sports, but with the context of, get those things out in one way. And when it comes to our discourse, when it comes to how we treat our fellow human beings, when it comes to our tolerance, when it comes to ways of showing respect for the flag, for fellow Americans, it's not my way or the highway. It's like my way or celebrate our differences. But as long as we know that we're coming at, at life with an eye towards focusing on what we share, the common good, common faith, then I think we can come together against our common enemy, and we can both realize the aspirations of the founding fathers for this country, for this nation. And that's the message that I think would unite us. That's what I would like to be a part of.
Yeah, I join you. And I think it's important which metaphors we pick, right? Because metaphors are just that, right? They're just metaphors or analogies that we use for all this. And if we continue to choose fight metaphors, as opposed to creative metaphors, as opposed to, if we keep talking about battles instead of, I don't know, like kindergarten classrooms, growth and change and development and learning and benefiting and creativity and gentleness and kindness, and those who've been around longer caring, like, we don't have to pick warrior and okay, go ahead. We're going to have boxing. We're going to have the NFL. We're going to have the UFC. We're going to have all of this. We don't have to say that's our metaphor for our political life. Like, we can really change the metaphors of what we're up to. And I feel like we are in need of a metaphoric change in our political dialogue. The level to which people move from battle language to attacking the Capitol is because we continue to tell people, and then all of a number of our political friends are having to go back and they're like, okay, when I was saying we need to fight like hell, I didn't mean to physically fight. And I'm just like, then stop using that language. I mean, just if the metaphor is dangerous, if it were actualized, pick a better metaphor. And I don't feel like we've learned in this country to switch our political metaphors. I think we're still stuck in a revolutionary war, and we still believe the only way we're going to get political freedom is to fight for it. And by fight for it, we mean war for it. And by war for it, we mean there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And that is not going to serve us in our world going forward. And so people like you, I think, are so important to help us find some different metaphors to alleviate the violent narrative. A lot of times in the Christian world, some of us who are this progressive Christian world talk about this notion of the myth of redemptive violence, that there's this story that says that somehow violence can become redemptive. And it has to do with the crucifixion of Jesus and has to do with, Augustine, however you want to say his name, Augustine's view of just war theory, that somehow you're going to get a good thing out of a violent bad act, that somehow, and a lot of us refer to that as a myth, and but not a good myth. I would actually say a falsehood of redemptive violence, that we end up believing this. And our politics, man, they are just riddled with this kind of language. And I sort of dream of a day when that's not the case, when we can just talk about the human flourishing in words and language and metaphors that are not about killing and destruction and power and winning and domination and losers and all the rest of it. But I'm guilty of this thing too, because I recognize that the danger on the other side can't be done away with by talking about kindergarten classrooms while they're talking about armed insurrections or putting people that are locked and loaded in polling sites. So we're a long way from those days. I get that, but I don't know. That's where I am on this February 2nd morning and all this.
I appreciate your perspective, Doug. I
boy.
I mean, I want people to be fired up. I want people, whatever fires people up to action, to motivation. I'm all right with you being a warrior for justice. I'm all right with you finding the fight inside you to get up out of bed and look at all the different choices you could do with your day and decide that this is a righteous cause worth fighting for. I'm not as, that's maybe where you and I may may part, because I may not go all the way with you on that, because I'm trying to get. I actually feel like what was it? Is it Barry Crimmins who said um, uh, college campuses are beds of student rest? You know, um, trying to trying to get people fired up, and however we can, to both the fact that there's a need for participation in our democracy, to protect it, to circle the wagons, and to find common ground and find, coalitions that are united against what really is a common enemy. That's why the language in the Constitution specifies foreign or domestic. Now more than ever, whatever will get people to pay attention and stay away from, their electronic devices, which they're now probably using and watching this. So I got to be careful not to,
That's right. They're on you, Dode. They're on you. Yep. Yeah, look,
But,
I'm not suggesting one shouldn't defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I'm just suggesting our metaphors for what we should discuss as defense could be different. But I'm one of those hardline committed sort of pacifists that I want to incorporate into the rest of my life. It just seems to me that our violence narratives and metaphors just need a refresh.
This is why you're my favorite preacher, pastor. Why do I call you? What's the right term? Pastor?
Yeah. I think I am very open to all those terms. Yeah.
Leader, because you inspire me to be. You're a better man than I am, and you inspire me, to do better in my own world. To both watch my languages, challenge me to think of different ways of expressing myself. If I talk about, my instinct is to talk in the language that I grew up with,
Sure.
Fight metaphors or whatever, that I give myself an extra pause, partially out of conversations and dialogue like this, to let's think maybe there's another way I can do it. And it challenges me to be more, more circumspect when choosing language, and be more self-aware. So thank you for that. And
there's an old shtick from Saturday Night Live when who's the person that back in the 80s, he's still a comedian. He was he did the news show on Saturday Night Live. Dan, maybe you remember. Dennis Miller. Thank you.
Dennis Miller?
Dennis Miller has this little shtick that I remember because I was just new to Christianity about the time I heard it, so it sort of lodged into my brain. He said, it's written that blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And I'm good with that because we'll just push them down and take it back if we want it. Kind of a classic Dennis Miller way, right? Like, there's people who are like, "Oh yeah, you guys just keep going with that." Like, how's that ever worked for anybody else? That's chosen not to use violence and not to use that kind of strength. Hey, Dode, one of the things we like to do sometimes is say thanks to the people who've made comments. We've already gone long here, so we might as well just keep going. Dan, can you let's just throw up all the comments here, and then Dode, at the end, if you want to comment on any of them, once we're done, you can give one last comment to all these. So Dan will be doing this. So Linda says hello from Arizona. Hello, Linda. Hope you're still watching. You've been around for a while. Mark, thanks for your guest. I officiated a wedding where Moby sang. Peace. Well, that's kind of fun. Also says prosperity gospel has warped Christian values. Our next one, Scott says, why do you people want to F up this country? So,
oh my God, how much time do we have?
We get lots of people. Barbara says language is critical, and I do believe it is effective. So start the Thank You, Joe campaign.
Thank you, Barbara.
She's getting into that. Mary says, yes, President Biden is solving problems while Republicans are passing laws to rig the next elections, and then does a hashtag Save Blue in 22. Oh, Save Blue in 22 to save our democracy. I love a rhyme, Mary. Well done. Then Mike says, good morning and welcome to Dode Levenson. Mike's a frequent commenter and watcher here. He says, would you agree that Republicans under Trump administration are the most damaging all across the spectrum, from ecology to political law, human rights, as well as relationships with our allies? Social reforms need to seem more needed now than ever before. how should progressives now begin to counter the dangerous rhetoric in a meaningful way? And I think Mike might have one more comment. What excites you and defines you? The violent rhetoric is very telling of the positions people have camped out in. If everybody else wants to throw one up, you're welcome to. So, Dode, any of that sort of strike you before we say farewell for the day?
All of it. I love the Mike's long question, and of course, I am in agreement. I believe that that Donald Trump has been the most divisive president, and for all those reasons and more. In fact, one of the friends that I'm talking to, and it's really strained our friendship, and he personally has lost childhood friends, 50-year friendships, childhood friendships over this. As I said, I talked to him the other day, and I said, the thing that makes me so sad is that we went through X number of presidents together, and this guy somehow has become a wedge between family, between friends, causing the cessation of friendships that would never have otherwise been forced to, choose either, pledge allegiance to Donald Trump or our friendship is over. And before my friend could switch it back, say, well, it's you guys too, which is, a common rhetorical jujitsu move on their part, which is whataboutism. And that drives me bananas because it's rhetorically cowardly and obfuscates, what's the point of true dialogue. But having said that, the divisiveness that seems to thrill in the divisiveness, which serves our enemies. Since it says here right on our dollar bill, the United States of America, and part of the I think it's the Bill of Rights is that we're supposed to come together for with the common welfare, that we celebrate our individuality, we celebrate our freedoms, but when it comes to common enemies, we're supposed to unite together, considering the size of our country and everything else. So, yeah, I 100% agree on those comments. I'm sorry I can't see them all at once. Why do we want to screw up the country? I love that one. That's beautiful. But I don't want to screw up the country. I really don't. In fact, I'd rather just go back and doing what I was doing. But the events of the country in the last several years have compelled me and other like-minded friends to kind of join together with Doug and other coalitions in order to combat it. In fact, Billy Ray, who is our colleague and friend, who incredibly gifted and prolific screenwriter and director and producer, wrote The Hunger Games, and I believe he said through his characters that hope is the one thing that conquers fear. And the right seems to be very, very afraid of all kinds of things, boogeyman, real and imagined, and are using that fear to justify all kinds of behaviors which may not be warranted. And so hope is, why do I want to screw up the country? I don't want to screw up the country. I think that I want to give the country hope that this is that we can, the words of the founders, again, a more perfect union, that we can do better than what we have been doing. And that if you look at this as a contraction, as a growing pain, that if we are going to endure all of this that we have for the last X number of years,
nice.
I want to do whatever I can. There's a Jewish phrase called tikkun olam, which means to heal the world. We all have our role to do that. And you have to ask yourself with every action you do, are you healing the world, or are you, hurting it more? Or what are you individually doing? What are you responsible for to make the world a better place? And certainly it all starts local, with being courteous to people and being polite and fostering a dialogue rather than resolving with fists or guns or even rhetoric that is inflammatory that can lead to both. So
we're going to let Kelly Godfrey have the last word. Well played there, Dan. I'm glad I came across your conversation today. I feel encouraged. Thank you. Well, thank you, Kelly. You You can follow all this over on our YouTube channel, which also helps us if you subscribe. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers over there. So we'll come and go on YouTube. If you can head over there, that would be awesome. Dode, thank you for your friendship, for all your wisdom, for your screenwriting, and for your messaging mavening.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Right.
I love the causes that you devote yourself to. You continue to inspire. You inspired me. That's why I'm here today. And I believe in your mission. I believe in your cause. And I hope that this the podcast and all the work that you do inspires everybody else to look at that truck behind me where we're standing and grinning in front of, I believe that's Marina Del Rey, in front of Catherine and Bruce Cameron, who wrote Dog's Purpose, their place. Faith, hope, and love will triumph over fear. And that is where we need to go. That bus is going somewhere. I hope you guys are on it. So thanks very much.
Well said, my friend.
For the conversation.
All right, everybody. Thanks for being around. We'll be back tomorrow and again on Friday. And, take care of each other and try to love somebody today.